Did you know that eye gouging has a near 100% chance success rate at stopping every MMA fight? Sorry. Okay, so I had to give you a little bit of clickbait right there to kind of hook you into this one, but that statement is really true but not true. So if you do gouge somebody in the eyes, you're not ending the fight in your favor, you're getting disqualified, you're losing the fight, and you're probably not going to get invited back unless you are a very popular fighter for some random reason. However, I do want to talk about eye gouges because it's a really controversial piece of martial arts, and it is a very important element to snake style kung fu. So let's get into it. Okay, but to go back and revisit that introduction, I do want to talk about why eye gouges are illegal in combat sports, and it all comes down to the extent of the injury. The consequence of an eye gouge lasts much longer than the fight itself and can be quite serious. People can lose their eye or their eyesight over an eye gouge, and that's not worth it when you're going through a sanctioned fight. However, there are fight leagues that do allow eye gouges. There's one called King of the Streets, and I have seen a fight ended with an eye gouge, but it's not from a straight poke like a snake tongue strike that you'd be thinking. It actually came from a ground position, and I would say, as bad as this sounds, probably the most efficient eye gouge I've ever seen. The man was on top, he was throwing punches, this is bare knuckle fighting, and by this time he had landed enough strikes that his knuckles were worn down, his hands were probably hurting by that time, he had tried dropping elbows, his opponent had maintained some good face coverage to block the strikes, and he couldn't secure anything to go for a joint lock. He had tried a couple of times, so he managed to put his hands on the guy's head and use his thumbs to go in for the eye gouge. And although, again, super dangerous, could lose eyesight over this, it was probably the most controlled I've ever seen because he used an amount of pressure that slowly increased. And of course, not like so slow, you know, it was a fight, but it got to the point where it was controlled. When the other man tapped, he let go right away. I'm not saying that this is going to win every fight. I'm not saying that this is something that you should be trying to do in your combat sports training. However, it was a particular option that has been taken, and I think that was probably the best control that I've ever seen. Okay, but let's get back to the Kung Fu side of things and the snake Kung Fu side of things. So first, let's look at the Kung Fu way of doing this technique. This is going to be our snake tongue technique. So we have our two fingers extended out. Now make sure when you do this, pull the ring finger and the pinky finger in, and the thumb is also going to be in, keeping it nice and flat on the bottom. We're not going to touch, and we're not going to make it like a peace sign like this. We want to make sure that we can flatten out the palm and get some alignment behind it. Now, you'll notice my fingers aren't totally straight out like this because I want to allow myself some cushion if I do make contact. If my fingers are flexed or curved a little bit upward, if I have them totally straight out and I hit, I have a chance of really jamming my finger. But if I have them bent, I have that safety cushion that the finger will further bend a little bit more. It'll be uncomfortable, but I won't break or jam my fingers. Okay, so we're going to work with this. Now, this has to extend out on a straight line. So you can start either from a real neutral snake position. You can even start with the hand here, already in the snake tongue position. And then think of withdrawing back towards where our shoulder is. Just get used to bringing it back, extending out, bringing it back, extending out. Okay, so naturally, elbow drops down, and then we're going to extend up. When the elbow is down, our ribs are protected, our hand is up, and then we can shift forward and strike to the eyes. So turn that hip, turn that shoulder forward, nice and loose, and snap. Okay, so if we want to make this real snaky and start from a snake position, we can even work with our back hand over the top, front hand over the top, like we've done before, or we can just move in straight from the neutral position, snake hand, turn it into that snake tongue strike. Or we can work from blocking an incoming attack, either pressing down and striking, or if it's a lower one, press down with both hands and shift back and strike. In the book Wrath of the Dragon, The Real Fights of Bruce Lee by John Little, there is an account of fights throughout Bruce Lee's life. Now, I do want to mention that this is an excellent book and I highly recommend that you read it. John Little did a ton of work, and this whole section is just references in the book. He interviewed a ton of people, he did a lot of fact checking, and he was able to compile a lot of stories about Bruce Lee's fights. Now, one last thing I want to mention is fights were not like you see now, not like MMA, not like UFC. Sanctioned fights were typically karate tournaments or boxing matches, and then everything else was street fights or sparring. And that's actually one of the things I like. In the end of the book, there's even a log between all of the fights that he had, his win-loss record, and there's even a separate section for sparring where the matches were still to test an ability, but they weren't for like a knockout outcome or, out of aggression. But going back into the book itself, and really relevant to what we're talking about, is that Bruce took into account his size against many of his opponents. He wasn't in any weight classes. If this was going to be in self-defense, and whenever people are getting into fights, there's no weight class, he needed to be able to protect himself. And I'm going to read a section here just to explain it, and then we'll talk about the training. Bruce was intrigued by the fact that most Americans were physically bigger and stronger than he was, and set about researching what areas of the human body remained vulnerable to attack irrespective of one's physical size. Strikes to the eyes, throat, and groin were obvious examples, and he worked tirelessly on perfecting such strikes. To work on his finger jab to the eyes, he hung a domino mask from the ceiling of his room and every night practiced jabbing his fingers through the small eye holes, doing multiple sets of 30 to 40 thrusts each in an attempt to lay down the neuromuscular pathways necessary to scratch the cornea of a person's eyes as a reflexive strike. He became so precise that he was able to thrust his fingers through the eye holes without the mask moving. That's super impressive. And it was something that I was inspired by when reading this book, and especially this year in revisiting snake-style kung fu and working on something like a straight thrusting jingji. When it comes to poking the eyes, you have to be precise because we have all this skull around us. We don't want to jam and break our fingers over a single strike. However, with that said, the eyes actually are pretty large when we look at the ocular cavity. It's not just the visible eye, but above and around it as well. So there is some leeway. And I was unable to find a domino mask for myself, just one of those regular like Lone Ranger party masks. So instead, I found a template online to make a mask out of cardboard, and I even painted it. If you get this reference, extra points. Now, this mask I've been doing this training for a couple of months now, and I do about 30 strikes per day. I started with just a single eye gouge, just working to get used to my distance and my timing and my angle. And when I felt more comfortable and confident in that, I started implementing combinations. So I would do a defensive block, parry, and then strike. And in doing so, I developed a lot of confidence in it, but I wouldn't say I'm at the level of Bruce Lee, being able to do it without moving the mask. As you can see, this mask has taken a bit of a beating around the eyes, but I found it to be very interesting in training to develop accuracy and speed and just being able to have confidence in the technique. So now, after hours and hours and days and months of training this, do I feel more confident about using this in self-defense or in a street fight? Well, I would say I don't have as much confidence as you would expect. For one, yes, I feel more precise, that if I were to use it, I probably could land it. Of course, as people are moving, when there's aggression, your adrenaline is pumping, things are going to change. But I do feel that there would be a chance that I can make it from point A to point B effectively. Now, with that said, though, when it comes to a confrontation, when you are fighting somebody, when it comes down to that physical aggression, this is a decision that you have to make even before the fight. How aggressive you plan to be. Poking somebody's eyes out can have drastic consequences, even in the real world. And if it's a fight over some guy shouting and yelling and being drunk and aggressive, do they really need their eyes poked out? And that's something that I feel it's going to have to be more extreme than that for me to want to resort to an eye gouge. So I would probably just focus on some of the more fundamental techniques, closing those fists, throwing a punch, dropping an elbow, and then even kicking towards the shins and knees. But it would have to require a very specific situation for me to want to go all the way to poke somebody in the eyes. Now, this is not to say that should not be your option, but I want you to think realistically as to which point, when it comes down to aggressive violence, are you going to be able to throw that strike to the eyes? Now, with all of that said, you also need to realize that this is still not a 100% technique. There are no 100% techniques, okay? So before you say, you're wasting your time, just punch him in the face. That's true, you could punch him in the face, but that also just might make your opponent angry. It may not knock them out. It may not do the damage that you're hoping to. So allow this some space, okay? This can be used, but it may not be the last strike in the exchange. It may buy you time that you throw this up, you poke somebody in the eye, you jar them, you give yourself a chance to create distance, or either a little bit so you have you can control the situation, or completely that you can run and get out of there. This may buy you that opportunity. Or it may give you that moment to stun, and then you can follow up with one of your stronger combinations. Depending on if you're going to fight back, depending on if you're going to run, this may be a useful technique, and I don't want you to look at it as either the god of all techniques, the end-all be-all, or something that you're going to throw out just because it's not practical. Okay? It does have its use. It's just whether or not you want this tool in your toolbox. Okay? Now, there's a lot more that can be said about this, and I hope at least I've given you a little more well-rounded approach and something a little more grounded. I'm not saying to just believe in an eye gouge to end a fight, but also it can be useful. And to try to find and calibrate your bearings onto how useful you see this strike. All right, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So go ahead and drop them down in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.